Hello, my name is Martin Fippard, and I'd like to introduce you to a truck concept that has always fascinated me, the dromedary tractor unit. No one really knows where the term drom originated, but it seems likely that a camel sometimes carries a load on its back, and that's exactly what a drom tractor does too. Today, dromedary combinations are found in many different parts of the world, but some of the earliest examples are thought to have originated in California with Pacific Intermountain Express in the early 1950s, using bubble-nosed Peterbilts very similar to this superb example operated by Gerald Nordman of Enumclaw.
Well, I found it in North Dakota, and I brought it back here, and it was a short wheelbase, and I cut it up and I put a longer wheelbase, 3-axle, or my driver's back there, with Rayco suspension and higher ratio rear ends, and then I just took it down to the bare frame, pulled the motor out, everything. It was just two frame rails sticking out, and I just slowly started building. And then I built on it for a while, and then I stopped and did another truck. And then when I got in trouble with being sick, I just went out in the barn and I'd work for 2 or 3 hours and work on it. And I slowly just, the cab had no doors, the fenders were off. I went through the doors of the nose, everything to restore it. Built the drum, measured everything out so that the drum would fit on it right. And I'm really happy the way it come together. When I was a kid, or younger, I was hauling bulk cement into Yucca Flats where they exploding atomic bombs. And my brother was driving for LA Eureka, and they had one of these, painted a different color, and I had a drum on it. And I always got enthused when I seen it, and I just made in my mind I was going to get a Peterbilt and put a drum on it. And it worked out great for me. I'm just happy, real happy with it. Yeah. I got a tuned up 335 into a 380 because I wanted some power in case I pull a trailer. And I put a 10-speed behind it, and then I built all the shifting tower to where it used to have 2 sticks. Well, I just went with 1 because I wanted to build it all up, and then I put a higher ratio rear ends under it and put a drive line with a hanger on it that's a carrier bearing. And I really lucked out. There's not a vibration in it. I tell you, when I time to go to Fontana, my buddy called me and said, well, he's ready to go, and I was still working on it. And this was 4:30 in the afternoon. I went in and took a shower and got clean clothes and packed and loaded up the truck and took off. And didn't know nothing from nothing of how it was going to work out. And it went all the way to California with not a vibration. I'm really happy the way it come together. And I'm really happy with the truck because it's just a neat truck. Not because it's mine, but I'm really excited about it. The only one with a drum on it, yeah. There's other Peterbilt bubble noses, but nothing with a drum, and what I done to make it look, fixed it up.
Well, my first recollections of dromedaries when I was about 12 years old back in the early 50s. And the first time I ever saw a picture of a drum, it was the PIE bubble nose Peterbilt with a small drum box on the back, about a 12-foot box, I believe. And it pulled a 35 to 40-foot semi-trailer. Now, PIE's reason for using this is at that time they were expanding from the western United States onward to the east, and when you got to Denver east, you couldn't have a drum. You had to have a real short tractor. So what PIE would do is they would load the trailers out of Oakland, California for the east, solid, and then put local drop freight in the drum, say that it was going to Denver. Or they would put more eastern freight in several drums and then reconsolidate it into Denver into another 35 to 40-foot trailer, which then would travel east. And that was the beauty of the drum. It gave them more cargo space than they had before. Oftentimes the trailers and the trucks never grossed out to weight, but they needed the cube because a lot of the freight was lighter than normal other types of freight would be, and the truck would be full before it was up to gross weight. This was one of the reasons why the drum became so popular, because it gave them another bite for cargo that they wouldn't normally have with just a regular semi rig. After PIE, the next company that I was familiar with that was running drums and was very innovative was Ringsby Truck Lines, also from Denver, and they ran to the West Coast, and they had some innovative Peterbilt drums, and they had the penthouse sleeper above the cab. And oftentimes these had a window in the front of the sleeper, which set up on top of the cab above the driver. Now you can imagine the poor bloke that's in there wakes up just as they come to an underpass. And I'm sure that some of the drivers down below had wet shoulders, but it would scare the devil out of me. But they were really interesting. A lot of them had twin steer on the front, and they had longer drum boxes than PIE had, with the same philosophy that it gave them extra cargo space, and so you could actually, have 12 foot plus 35 to 40 feet, gave you a tremendous amount of cargo space. And that was the beauty of the drums. My father and I worked for a company in Yakima, Washington. It was based in Seattle, and they bought their one and only drum about 1953, I believe. And it had dual uses. It pulled a sugar tanker, a liquid sugar tanker, or a bulk powdered sugar tanker, and then it had the drum box in front, because in those days the sugar companies also put up their product in aluminum square tote bins, they called them. They were about 5.5, 6 foot tall and about 5 foot square. They were heavy. They about 1,500 pounds of sugar. They would carry those on the front part of the open part of the drum box. And then, because they had this type of haul and a contract with the UNI Sugar Company, it was part of the rate structure was to return the empty tote bins back to the sugar factory at no charge. And so by having that drum space, they could stack all these up there and still haul, if they were hauling a freight trailer behind it, have a load of revenue freight back over to Eastern Washington with the empties.
But of course, drum operations in the USA during the 50s and 60s were not confined exclusively to the western and midwestern states. Examples also showed up as far east as Maine. In fact, it was the Coles Express Crackerbox GMC with the drum tank that first triggered off my interest in this configuration back in the 1960s. Introduced to the Coles fleet in 1964, this was one of 4 such units, each of which carried a 3,300 US gallon tank and hauled a tandem axle box van or refrigerated semi-trailer. The twin steer tractors were powered by the Detroit diesel 6V71, an engine popular at that time. Fortunately, one of these rare and distinctive outfits has been preserved and today resides in the Coles Land Transport Museum in Bangor, Maine, close to where it originated 40 years ago. Even more fortunate is the fact that Dave Hiscox from Bow Bells, North Dakota, is the owner of this much modified Crackerbox Jimmy with a unique and fascinating history. Dave and Irene Hiscox have a very special relationship with their truck, a relationship that's been going on for almost 30 years. After all, it not only provides them with an income, it gives them the motivation to keep on trucking. An ex-high school teacher with a master's degree in physics and a do-it-yourself mentality, Dave purchased a cracker box in 1976 for the grand sum of $1,000 US. He then went on to streamline the cab with a fiberglass shell and to install the curtain-sided drum. All was well until 1982, when the Surface Transportation Assistance Act created unexpected problems. Essentially, there was conflict between state and federal law as to whether a drum was now classified as a truck or as a tractor. And the situation was complicated by some authorities insisting that Dave's rag-sided drum was not a drum box at all. In the next few years, Dave and Irene were forced to become experts in federal transportation law as they found themselves pulled over and interrogated at every weigh scale in the country. Their rig is 72 feet long overall, and although federal highways are subject to a generous overall limit, some anti-truck states still make a point of contesting this. After a great deal of aggravation, the couple finally decided to bypass the usual channels and go straight to the top. They wrote directly to President Bush Sr., explaining their position. 23 days later, they received presidential authority to drive their rig across any US state. But there was a condition, and this was that the authority only applied to the cracker box throughout its useful life. In other words, as soon as the Screaming Jimmy was pensioned off, the special dispensation to operate the combination would be withdrawn. So more than 20 years later, and nearly 40 years after it was first built, the Hiscox drum combination is still running coast to coast. In fact, these days, it's a case of which will wear out first, the Jimmy or its long-suffering, hard-driving owners.
I'm Russ Neal, live in Delta, BC. Used to own some drums in Winnipeg, the early 60s. I've been working the rest of my life trying to pay for them. One thing I remember was that we'd be stopping and people say, "What do you carry in that box?" And we say, "We have a supercharged engine in there, and we come to a hill, we just press a button and we click it in, and away we go up the hill." And people believed us. We had 262 Cummins in them.
4 and 4s.
4 and 4 transmissions. And the trucks were geared originally at about 55 mile an hour. And when I bought one, the first thing I done is went into Kenworth and Vancouver and changed the gear ratio, the rear end gear ratio.
And made them a little quicker?
Made them a little quicker.
I'm Tony Gussie. I live in Surrey, BC, and I used to drive for Russ for East West Transport years ago back there in Winnipeg. And it was a pretty good job at the time because those trucks were kind of a prestigious unit to drive because of the drums. And East West had a pretty good reputation also. They had nice looking equipment, and they had the freight, and we used to come, I think we did actually on occasion run 2 ringers out of Winnipeg to Vancouver. We'd go out of Winnipeg and get into Vancouver at 2 o'clock in the morning, and as long as it took the dolly off and hook up again, and we'd be back out and heading for Winnipeg. And those old cab-overs had a screw-on rad cap. And dumb old me got out of the truck, flipped up the Kenworth emblem, screwed off the whatchamacallit, and poof, 230-degree water all over the side of my face. You remember that? And I stood there with the cap in my hand, just like, duh. So and he said to me, "Well, I bet you learn to never do that again."
Real sympathetic, eh?
Good rigs, and they were good times. It was a lot more fun to be a truck driver then than it is now, I can tell you that.
As Tony suggests, the job may well have been more fun in that there was a lot less interference from management and drivers were allowed to simply get on with the job. But the equipment of the period left a lot to be desired too, and Tony also recalls with some contempt cabs that were cramped, cold and uncomfortable, and engines that wouldn't pull your hat off. The job may have been more fun in some ways, But driving a truck such as the Crackerbox GMC was no joke, and was certainly a world apart from some of the modern equivalents which offer very high levels of performance and comfort.
Along comes the baking companies, and they discovered the Droms. Wonder Bread, Fran's Baking Company in Portland, Oregon. They all discovered the Droms in the 60s to haul bread, because tremendous amount of cube in the back trailers. Now they're pulling 45 and 48-foot trailers full of bread, but they don't weigh anything. So they got all this drum space to add more bread. And they use them up to even today. See them being used for years. There's nothing out that really replaces them. Possibly the closest thing to them, and they don't operate in every state in the U.S., is triples. And they have the volume, but they're not legal in every state. So you probably won't see the drum being replaced at this time.
Several of the leading bakeries in the Pacific Northwestern USA have used droms since the latter half of the 1950s. And today examples may be seen operating in the colours of Gaze, France and Wonder Bread. A nation, they say, marches on its stomach, and one company helping to ensure that stomachs are filled and that the nation stays on the move is the Fran's Bakery. Fran's bakes bread products for the Pacific Northwest, and its premises on the site of the family-owned Gaze Bakery in Seattle supplies thousands of retail stores throughout the region. Gaze is now part of the Fran's operation, and their landmark plant sits between the disused Wonder Bread Bakery and the home of legendary rock guitarist Jimi Hendrix. Most baking takes place at night, and trucks hauling the product from the plant to the stores and distribution centres leave early in the morning. Bread, cakes, rolls and hamburger buns are loaded aboard in cages or trays, and being lightweight items, the various truck combinations are filled long before they reach their maximum weight of 80,000 pounds. One solution to the space weight issue is to use load-carrying tractors, and consequently Fran's use long wheelbase Peterbilt 362 cabovers built to order and retrofitted with drum boxes to accommodate the extra freight. The drum box concept has been used by bakeries in the Pacific Northwest for many years, and in some instances was used to haul empty trays back to the bakery, leaving the trailer free to carry revenue-earning freight. The Fran's Gaze operation operates doubles too, in order to gain extra space. But of course these are not suitable for all conditions, particularly the ice and snow encountered during the winters in the eastern parts of Washington state. One of the less obvious benefits of the drum concept is that even when empty there is some weight over the drive axles, and of course the long wheelbase provides a superbly comfortable ride. Despite the long wheelbase and the poor wheel cut common to most North American tractors, the big Fran's drum outfits handle the downtown streets of Seattle and Tacoma with relative ease. The Fran's trucks are specified so as to be as light as possible, and to this end feature a day cab and polished Alcoa wheels. A bright yellow and blue paint scheme ensures that these big rigs certainly stand out from the crowd. Despite the overall dimensions of the Peterbilt cabovers and the box van trailers, aerodynamics are not really all that bad, thanks to a roof-mounted airfoil and close coupling between the Drom and the semi-trailer. A regular washing program guarantees that the trucks are always spotless, as befits an operation hauling foodstuffs. And this latest Franz Peterbilt absolutely gleams in the Pacific Northwestern sunshine. In the Franz Gaze operation, the Drom Box and the semi-trailer are loaded and unloaded through side doors located specifically to line up with the factory doors. In this way, both the Drom and the trailer can be accessed simultaneously.